Our ancient witness today is from Habakkuk, chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, and chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet received in a vision. How long, O God, am I to cry for help while you do not listen? How long will I cry oppression in your ear and you do not save? Why do you make me look upon injustice? Why do you countenance tyranny? Outrage and violence, this is all I see. All is contention and discord flourishes. The law loses its hold and justice never shows itself. The corrupt triumph over those who are righteous, and justice is perverted once again. I will stand on my watchtower and take up my post on my battlements, watching to see what God will say to me, what answers God will give to my complaints. Then the Holy One replied, write down this vision, inscribe it legibly on tablets so that a herald can visibly read it, since this vision will stand as a witness to the appointed time of judgment. It gives faithful testimony about a time that will come. If it is slow in coming, wait for it, for come it will without fail.
I hope you had a fun time this Halloween. I thought it was interesting that Halloween occurred on Friday this year. I'm not sure how often that occurs on a year or throughout time, but what a treat it must have been for trick-or-treat. The fact that Friday was not a school night, and kiddos would theoretically be able to stay up late if they did not have anywhere to be early Saturday morning. Or am I overthinking that? I tend to do that sometimes. Maybe I should just let that one be. But I spent Friday night screening a movie at the Pullman Civic Theater. I didn't realize that it was a zombie movie there, and I didn't realize zombie movies were so popular. But it did give the youth, some of the youth of Pullman, a place to go after trick-or-treating. So there's a trinity of days here, 3 days spanning from October 31st to November 2nd to celebrate. It's Halloween, All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, and Halloween relates to the ancient Celtic people who had a festival around this time of year, probably November 1st, and who believed that the veil between worlds, between this life and the next, became especially permeable this time of year. Well, I find it to be a good time to ponder the past, not with a desire to return to it per se, but as a way to be mindful of what has come before. And with that, of course, is to also ponder what might have been. And it was that sort of thinking that gave rise to All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, All Saints being the celebration of those folks considered as saints by the Christian Church, All Souls' Day being the day to recognize those that were saints to us, those near and dear to us. Now, it turns out it's an ancient habit to look to the past and to remember those who are deceased and no longer with us. Not just the Celts, but something more close to home would be, to my home, would be also Dia de los Muertos in Mexico. So personally, I like to set aside quiet time for remembering, for reflection, for prayer, and for good food, of course. I like to consume good food every day, though. All right. So let us light a flame here, shall we? Thank you, Kathy. And since that is done, let me ask you what stirs your memories this 3-day Hallowtide season. Who are the folks that linger in your mind? And how will that inspire your path ahead? And so let us gather these spirits here today. A few months ago, we touched on this idea of a cloud of witnesses that inspire our faith. Our ancestors would call them the saints of old. I have a few that I adore, many of them being 20th century folks. Martin Luther King Jr. and Dorothy Day come to mind. They are amazing people who walk the road with Jesus, his way of faith. They are easily recognizable in our lifetime. And as folks who lived out their faith in the everyday of their time, their efforts are entirely relevant to where we are today in terms of civil rights and workers' rights and women's rights. They are excellent companions when thinking about witnessing to faith. They're not the only ones, though. We could go back even further for sure. Or as Diana Butler Bass likes to say, to the pages of the past and find some more saints. Or perhaps a better way to say that is finding friends to help us along the way. I think we need that as people living out our faith journey. So two that stick out in my mind, I mentioned before, Francis of Assisi and Clare certainly, and also Julian of Norwich. Maybe they appeal to you as well. Perhaps some of those I mentioned have a soft spot in your heart similar to mine. Or maybe you have someone different in your mind who you are grateful for to get you to this day and this time. Well, the ancient witness for the day comes from the oracles of Habakkuk, a prophet of ancient Israel, active sometime around 600 BCE. Habakkuk appeared shortly after the Babylonian Empire came to rule over the landscape and was a much more violent time period than what had come before. And the annals of history know very little, virtually nothing about this prophet. There is not much we are able to question about this person. But what is recognizable is that whoever they were outraged at the suffering they had witnessed, and were so fed up, in fact, that they were willing to go toe-to-toe with God and demand something different to the status quo. I think maybe we might be able to relate to that. This prophet writes during a time in which all that once was has been lost. The presence of warfare is escalating, and God appears to be far too silent for their tastes. And we can know that this is more than grieving the loss of the good old days. The situation has gotten so bad for so long that this is someone who wonders if God will ever speak again. And through their wondering out loud about why justice has not emerged in the midst of imperial reign, we find a tale about how to live under injustice, at least from their point of view. In other words, how is a devoted follower of God to deal with dominant imperial power or dominant oppressive power that slays nations without pity and seizes homes not its own? And after their lament, after their long list of grievances and what's omitted in the reading today, the rest of chapter 1, I find what they did to be rather intriguing. And rather than wallow in the silence, they decided to climb the watchtower and get a view. And what that gave them was a much broader perspective of God's vision of justice. But what they found was God's advice. When God finally did answer, God answered with the notion of to wait. Wait some more. And I would imagine that being justice-oriented as a faith community, that we are all too familiar with the fact that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. happened to write a book entitled Why We Can't Wait. And so I wonder maybe if those times when God is all too silent, if there is something that happens in the questioning and the wrestling with God. The quest to reach into the silence and move God to an answer. And the thing about waiting implies that there is something worth waiting for. And we often think of waiting as a passive activity, but in the scriptures, waiting always involves commitment and conviction. It involves a willingness to stand firm in belief and hope, even when all seems for naught. And one of the most important themes of the Holy Scriptures, of all of the Bible, is learning to trust that God is at work, even when we cannot see it. And learning to believe that God is still speaking, even when we cannot hear it. And Habakkuk frames for us what we find so often in these scriptures, a model for the full range of human emotion before God. And with its reading, we come to understand that God can handle all of what we are feeling, even when we cannot. And God can take the harsh and heartfelt questioning that we have and that we offer. And this writing reveals a larger narrative at work in the life of faith. It's hidden there in that questioning of God. Bible scholar Will Gaffney urges us to look deeper into this text, to see in Habakkuk a prophet bold enough to argue with God. That this is not an omnipotent and all-powerful God, but maybe that this God of relationship has limited God's self and is interdependent and even reliant on creation in that limiting. God is powerless here even to write God's own vision on the tablets, but instead must call upon Habakkuk to do so. God needs help, and so do we who are created in the image of God. And maybe it was God's way of helping us lean into the love and the work of others. But truly God is concerned, I'll say in conclusion, truly God is concerned about the relationships between people and God. We can take comfort in the fact that those who came before us not only got us to this point in the work of justice and in the work of caring, but also continue alongside us in our work, in our journeys. These saints whether epic or ordinary, give us glimpses of what a life of love looks like. Whether it be famous or obscure and unknown, whether dearly departed or still walking among us, they are folks to be grateful for. So who are you grateful for today? Amen.